All right, everyone. Thanks and welcome to the March 26th KUDO community meeting. I'm your host, Gerred, and we have a few things on the event agenda here. It looks like it might be a quicker meeting, and then we can go into open discussion or Q&A. Without further ado, let's get started and go over to Ken for the release of KUTTL 010.
Yeah, sure. We broke KUTTL out of KUDO. What's that?
Do you need a screen share?
No, I don't have anything to present really. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that we did have a release. There are some things that probably need to be shared as well as around expectations maybe. So we pulled our testing framework out of KUTTL. It was already being used in other projects. Internally to day 2, it was used with dispatch. Externally, there's lots of interest with projects that are involved either with OpenShift or Red Hat in general, and just lots of interest. So, and it made a lot of sense. So we cut that release out. We already had a commit from the community, which is really great. I have an integration into KUDO with a PR. I just had a passing test on that, so there are some things still to kind of do there. It's still pretty early. It's whatever we had in KUTTL. There's definitely features that we would like to see there. One that was just recently added that's worth talking about is the ability to run commands as background. And so the KUDO manager is run this way. I'm expecting other controllers to run this way. But that said, it feels like we need a readiness probe, like the things run in background, but you still need to know it's ready before you can start moving against it. So there's a couple of thoughts there. We either need a readiness probe, another idea, and one that I like in isolation anyway, is maybe having commands that have retry capabilities. So there's a frequency or a time limit on retries. It'll just keep retrying until it's successful kind of thing. I could see value in that regardless when we have an environment that's eventually consistent. So that said, it's KUTTL. I did put a request into some designers to create a logo for it because I'm all about getting an image. I did, of course, go with the cuttlefish and hoping to get some Kubernetes or testing like things surrounding that cuttlefish. I don't know. I've asked internal resources to our company to look at it, but I have no idea what the priority on that would be. If someone has other resources in the open space, I would love to know what those might be. It'd be super fun to have something great here. And I don't know what else to say, but the release is out there. Please use it, hammer up against it. We'd like to see other projects taking a shot at it. I'll be creating a video today or tomorrow on that, and that'll be available April 1st. That's it.
So in terms of testing other operators, do you have a particular one that you want to reach out to, like a real big one like Strimzy, and build or showcase what a test harness would be for a non-KUDO operator?
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, we should put together some ideas or add some things to the issues around that. But yeah, like so we have a few projects, right? Red Hat, I don't know what Red Hat's interest is, but I had a meeting with them that was with a large number of team members of theirs. They seem to want to use it for the operator SDK and maybe other, and I don't know what that leads to. We use it internally to day 2 for dispatch as well as KUDO. So we already have some multiple use cases for it. We hope that we can move our Convoy team to it as well. And there's some early pull requests to proof of concepts, I should say, around that. But to your point, Tom, I think getting this out to open source operators would be ideal. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys work with a lot of companies that are maybe developing their own operators. Maybe Gerred has one for Orango. That might just be non-D2IQ environment to start throwing it out there.
No, I love it. It's a great point. Yeah, I guess this is somewhat new, so it's worth stating. It's still underneath the KUDO umbrella. It's still brought up in this community meeting. It's still discussed in the KUDO Slack channel. And as far as triaging issues and bugs and features, still falls underneath KUDO until it, it could blossom to its own thing. It's quite possible. We'll see. We'll obviously react as needed.
Hey, one idea I had was maybe we eventually get this on Kubernetes SIG testing radar and demo it to SIG testing. Maybe try to get in as a sub project.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I actually had that in mind as well. I don't know what happened last week. I came across the SIG test and thought the very same thing. So let me make sure that's on our to-do. We definitely need to get it in front of them.
There's a couple of bash scripts that run as part of their CI process that essentially run a kubectl command and then wait for a particular element in the responding YAML to match something with an appropriate timeout. It seems like there could be a very simple demonstration for what it would look like to modify those bash scripts as KUTTL testing. And I can work with you, Ken. I've kind of played in there, unfortunately, for different things. So I can work with you and show you where they are and how the bash is made, and then maybe just take one file and we'll just one of the test suites and say, well, let's try this.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else on KUTTL? Going once, going twice. All right. Next, we have the Cloud Native Virtual Summit coming up next week. I know there's quite a few KUDO, KOI, operator, KUTTL, like talks about all these things. Matt or Nick, did you want to say anything about the summit?
Only that it's going to be super awesome. We now have 2,500 attendees for this, which is bigger than KubeCon Berlin, if anybody wants to like dig into stats. And still building every day. So there's a bunch of stuff on KUDO in there. Tom's speaking. Gerred, you've got a slot, right? Ken is talking about KUTTL, and the folks from Maya Data are talking about using KUDO to orchestrate Akka. For anyone who's not from D2IQ, the event's free. You can register at the URL right there. We're asking folks to make a donation through GoFundMe, which is all going to COVID-19 charities, and that is the same for the sponsors. So the whole thing's about charity, but it's going to be super cool. Keynotes from folks like Liz Rice, Kelsey Hightower, and talks from a bunch of other really interesting folks. So it's going to be a really good day. I would encourage you all to sign up. If you have got a talk accepted, we'd love to get your videos ASAP.
Yeah, Ken. Yeah, Gerred.
Woo! I'm done.
Tom's in, is he?
Tom wins. Tom wins.
I got mine last night, so I'm way ahead of the game.
Cool.
Only a week late.
Yeah, that's about it. Nick, you want to add anything that I've forgotten about?
No, that's pretty comprehensive. Actually, the Akka one is from the folks at Lightbend. Maya Data, I think, are doing something a bit different.
Oh, yeah, you're right, yeah.
It wasn't, speaking of that, since you guys are here, it wasn't clear how the Q&A is going to work after the video is shown.
I'm not entirely sure of that either yet, Tom, but
the email I got back said I was going to get an email with any questions that come up during the video. And I just thought that was...
I think there's been some confusion about that, because for folks who can be there in the time zone, come hang out in the chat and interact with folks.
Have we got a link to that yet? Like, I don't know what you mean by...
You will get stuff. You will get a link to the On24 platform over the next couple of days. which will give you all of the stuff you need to know about you know, how the logistics of it's going to work on the day. I'm going straight after this into a meeting with the organizing team, and that will be one of the things that we talk about. One of the things I'm not quite sure about is whether speakers need to register. I suspect you do, so I would go ahead and register anyway. But yeah, I think the Q&A bit, you know, someone said on one of the organizing threads, we're building the aeroplane as we're flying the aeroplane at the minute. So it's kind of like, I think nobody quite knows yet how these virtual things are going to work in the long run. So we're winging it slightly, apologies. But yeah, we'll hopefully it will work, and, you know, folks will have a good time.
Thank you, man.
Awesome, thank you. And I just noticed Jeff McCormick just joined. He's been actually working close with us on and testing out KUTTL. So yeah, just to reiterate for Jeff, and maybe we can talk about it in open discussion, but like we shipped 010 of KUTTL standalone and ready for contribution and caps. And one thing I need to do is finish up the governance and for the whole thing, but I will actually give some updates on that probably by the next community meeting, or at least just get the repo open. With that, we're moving on to the KUDO 0.12 cycle opening. We right now have a general list of enhancements that we know we want to get in before 1.0. I will make sure and publish those into a let me just mark it down. We would love comments on these. Not all these have caps yet. We have dependencies on that list. We have custom user defined commands, a few other things. So not everything has a cap, but it has been identified from people building operators in some places that we also want to make sure that we go before we call the operator experience as 1.0 as the end user side of it. So for 0.12, we're going to be focusing in again on support bundles and metrics, starting work on dependencies, and I think there's a few other things, and I'll make sure that gets published out. And I did have a proposal that we, given the kind of loss in time with everyone transitioning, some people transitioning to more at-home work, we actually pushed our release date by 1 week for this cycle. So we would release the second Friday of April, since we've all been prepping for this virtual summit and a few other things, or maybe even push it a little bit outside of that. So if no one's opposed to that, we'll announce the release date shortly. But I just want to let everyone know that that's a possibility right now. Any thing on that? Okay. Now to turn it over to Shane with some who wants to talk about Kubernetes add-ons with KUDO.
Hey, it's been very many months since I've joined this sync, so I've been out of the loop for a while. For the uninitiated and for the community, rather, I work on Convoy at D2IQ. It's our Kubernetes distribution. And one of the things we have in Convoy is called add-ons. What that really is right now, without getting into too much detail, but what you'll see if you use like a trial version of Convoy is a wrapper around Helm and KUDO. KUDO being the most recent addition to what is essentially a layer that tries to make the underlying machinery for an add-on application opaque to the perspective of tools that kind of deploy, and also from the perspective of end users that don't want to understand necessarily some of the inner workings of the tooling. So where we're at right now, and by the way, thank you, Jan. He contributed Jan and Zane both contributed a lot of the work there. And we recently released with KUDO support. So we're going to be using KUDO for the long term, and things are going really well with that. But the reason I wanted to come here today is basically related to an issue that you and I had talked on, Gerred, wherein like I want to say the last time I was in on this sync, we talked about this, and that was Helm support. And I know this is gonna rustle some jimmies, but Helm interoperability is a big thing on my mind when it comes to how we use KUDO going forward. We're kind of at a crossroads where a lot of our stack could actually potentially, like a lot of the machinery that we use could potentially be KUDO's machinery. We could get off of our internal machinery for some of the things that KUDO provides, because KUDO does provide a lot of what we need. But the thing that is basically in the way of that is Helm interoperability. We will be supporting Helm charts in the long term, in addition to the KUDO operators that we support. And so we're in a position where we're basically supporting those two paths. We would prefer potentially not to have to do it topically. Right now we have topical types, basically reference types that can either reference a KUDO or a Helm-based add-on. But that means we have two different stacks of machinery, more or less, that end up deploying add-ons. And it would be nicer if we could instead just have KUDO absorb Helm charts, which is something we talked about before. And most recently, you and I, Gerred, kind of had a thing where it doesn't sound like something that KUDO in general wants to do, right? Or nobody wants to do currently. But basically, those reference types are one of the features of our stack right now that basically it's shorthand for KUDO and Helm add-ons. And it's declarative as opposed to Helm, which one of the biggest things about Helm is like it's a templater. And so it doesn't have a lot of the features of KUDO that we want in its stack. We also have a testing framework. So while we are using KUDO long-term, and we are on KUDO 0.11 right now, for our add-ons, we also are evaluating KUTTL. Zane's kind of leading that up, and him and I are going to be working on that. So thank you, Ken, for KUTTL, because we already have an internal testing framework, and we may want to send some of our features into KUTTL rather than continue to build separately, when it seems like KUTTL covers a lot of our use cases too. So we have a lot of interest in KUDO and kind of the KUDO ecosystem as it stands right now. And so my question, without any more ado, is basically, are there any ways in which the community, you guys, could see coming up with some kind of interoperability for Helm charts in KUDO being something that would be acceptable and something that we could work on for a future version of KUDO?
I'm not sure if you're familiar with our KEP process, but there's a KEP out for running Helm charts. What would be helpful from our end is if you were to go into that KEP and put in what you mean by interoperability, and kind of explain specifically ConOps and use cases, and make sure that the KEP outlines what you're thinking along those lines. If you just mean deploy and you don't mean adding new plans or doing anything else crazy, I think that's somewhat reasonable, and it might already cover it. But if there are other things that you're looking for, that would be helpful for our design.
Sounds good. I must have missed that KEP, but that's what I'll go look for next time.
It is 13. It doesn't reference Helm in the name. I'll put it in the chat here. It's
okay, that might
external
have been
specs, because the idea is that you don't necessarily just need a KUDO operator. Maybe you want to run a CNAB bundle or a Helm chart or just a generic operator. And what does that mean? Let me just find the chat somewhere.
And so you know, there is a branch that started to explore this, and what stopped it originally was our dependencies started to get a little bit out of control, and it was pretty tightly coupled, and in my feeling, like fairly brittle. There might be another way to skin that cat and get like the same like results that we want, where a Helm chart could be deployed, and especially now that we have the task system in place, some of this may even change out of the get-go, but it does potentially make it a lot more modular. I also chatted with Michelle Nurali when we through our sandbox stuff, in that having the opposing side where you could progressively enhance a Helm chart with KUDO plans, so you could bring day 2 ops into KUDO. We don't have a KEP for that. It was just like an idea that
we do. That's KEP 12 extensions.
Yes, what she was saying a little bit different, where you'd actually put KUDO resources into a Helm chart, and if Tiller happens to be there, I'm sorry, if the KUDO controller happened to be there, you just deploy it as a Helm chart. So a little bit different than 12, but yes. Yeah, her idea was adding like backup to the MySQL chart directly.
Right. So in the 12 version of that, you would run the Helm chart as a KUDO operator and then create an extension
Yes.
of that chart
Yes.
with a backup plan.
So what she brought up to me, and I just wanted to mention was she had the converse idea as well. So that might be another thing on our radar. So it's clear we need to figure out something with all these external formats. And keeping in mind that KUDO is an orchestration framework, I guess there's really no reason it shouldn't be able to orchestrate these external formats as well. So, all right, with that, I'll turn it over to. Does anyone else have any more comments or wants more discussion on this one?
I have a couple more things to bring up.
Yes. Oh yeah, sure.
So 13, I didn't know about it. Thank you. That sounds like a great place for me to go for getting the Helm interoperability. To add on that, to basically expand on that, it is really just kind of at this point, we just need the deployment. We don't need to have it automate building out new plans and stuff like that necessarily to start with. That's something we can think about later. Because basically at this point, with the feature set that KUDO has, if KUDO had the catalog of Helm, KUDO would be a no-brainer. We wouldn't be considering kind of which stack we were going to kind of invest in more. That's pretty much the only thing. So having that interoperability could be huge. The other thing that's kind of related to this, two other things that are related to this. Is there a cap or any interest in potentially having something of it? This is going to be a little weird, so I'm just kind of throwing this out here. I apologize in advance. This sounds silly, but some kind of a reference CR for KUDO operators, something that would be kind of a very lightweight couple of line reference to a KUDO operator that would be a declarative resource you could post that would then get turned into the KUDO operator that you want, as opposed to kind of posting the KUDO operator directly, like the whole thing.
If you don't mind starting a cap, well, like even the basics, like a summary of motivation, we can talk about it. So far we've chosen. We made a decision back in our July to make movements on our front end, so like the actual operator definition, and keep the back end kind of static while we were doing that, so we weren't making like changes in two places at once. So that's yes, it's a question in our heads. We just haven't started to try to answer that. So if you're interested in starting to write that down, we can start to try to answer that and see what the best way to go is.
Sounds good to me. That is something, that would potentially be helpful if we were wanting to kind of move more and more towards just being KUDO for our stack, which isn't a given yet, but it's something that we're evaluating.
There's been some good advancements in OCI and stuff that can carry dependencies with it, and so totally, yeah. Like if you want to start that conversation, like let's do it.
Okay, I'll sort of keep for that. And I'll also add to 13. Then my last question, I'm sorry for taking up so much time. This is related to KUTTL. So this is kind of specifically for you, Ken, and maybe this just needs to start being a cap. But in our testing framework, which I think right now, I'm pretty much the sole maintainer of it, and it's a testing framework in its infancy. It's not very mature yet. But two of the things that we have a lot of the same features that KUTTL has. We have a test harness. We have like a lot of good defaults and stuff like that. But it is non-declarative, which honestly, I don't actually necessarily worry about that part as much right now for the testing framework. It is nice to have a declarative, but that's not the biggest thing about KUTTL that I actually am interested in. The things that I believe are missing, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but after reviewing the code and stuff like that is, we have tooling for cluster creation and cleanup. Currently, we do that through kind libraries as a library, basically. The test harness and kind of how the tests are set up, try to automate, like more or less you say, give me cluster, and then you receive a Kubernetes interface in Go or a kube config or whatever. You do very little, and you just receive the client that you need to start writing tests. And then we also have networking utilities for like setting up metal LB inside of that kind cluster, and then being able to talk to it over the local bridge network and stuff like that. These things are really important for like making it fast to develop our tests. What do you think about that being something that we were to, if we were to contribute to KUTTL? Do you already have some plans for that? Did I miss another KEP?
Well, it's worth noting. It's worth noting that we do have a KEP process as well, and they're separate. They're in the KUTTL repository, so it's kind of
I've been watching them. I just didn't see one anything about this.
Yeah. It's totally fresh, and yeah, it's and so with that said, there are 3 ways that KUTTL can be used currently, or 3 mechanisms that work with a cluster. One is kind of what we call mocked. It's essentially the API server and its ED. And requires those libraries on the local system in order for that to work.
Right.
And
I've seen that.
Limited in its feature set because it doesn't have the full stack. So you got to be careful about what you're using it for. The second would be kind. Again, it expects the dependencies to be there within the path, that kind of thing, and we'll spin up an instance of kind. And the other is it will use whatever was created for it. I haven't thought of KUTTL as a cluster creator. It's really just a tester against it. It's used and applied after a cluster is created. So far we've thought of whatever mechanisms being used by whoever, we support that. We just now if we wanted to think about maybe a cluster creator or cluster provider, creating an interface for a provider that could be hooked in, we should create a KEP for that and then consider it. It seems outside of what we really have been focusing on within KUTTL itself.
Yeah, it does. And that's kind of why I brought it up, because that's something that's probably the biggest thing that we have that KUTTL doesn't have, whereas KUTTL's test harness and kind of that side of things is much farther along than what we have. So I didn't know if a marriage of the 2 is something you'd be interested in, but at the very least, if you're interested in me to just starting a KEP for that kind of functionality, then I'll do that. Yeah.
If we start a KEP, we can at least start the conversation, but I would say it doesn't hit the high priority for me. Or I would say this, if we went that route, that we would probably want to abstract out a cluster provider type environment, and then others can provide a cluster provider. But there's so many other tools for that kind of thing that I'm not sure we'd want to compete in that space. But yeah, I mean, it's worth
That's fair. Yeah, I feel like this is, I understand where you're coming from on that, yeah. Okay, well, I am sorry for all the time I took, but I wanted to put out some feelers, and I feel like I got some good feedback. So I'll be looking at one and starting 2 KEPs.
Fantastic, thank you, Shane. All right, last thing before any open discussion is a community team update. Passing over to Nick and Matt with that.